Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Film Studies. We are into the 1930s, and we just saw Dracula and heard about how Dracula helped to save Universal Studios. Well, Universal Studios was pretty intelligent, and they took the money that they made, the just killing they made from Dracula, and used it to procure the rights to a novel, an early 19th century novel by Mary Shelley called Frankenstein. And again, like Dracula, this is going to be a fully authorized adaptation of the film. They owned the rights to make it, so they're able to play it pretty close to the vest here. Interestingly enough, it would be these two films, Dracula and Frankenstein combined, that would help save the beleaguered studio during the Great Depression and establish them once and for all as the Monster Studio. So let's get into it. The classic and definitive monster horror film of all time, director James Whale's Frankenstein, is the screen version of Mary Shelley's Gothic 1818 nightmarish novel of the same name. The film with Victorian undertones was produced by Carl Laemmle Jr. for Universal Pictures, the same year that Dracula, another classic horror film, was produced within the same studio. Both films helping to save the beleaguered studio during the Depression era. The sequel to this monster story is found in director James Whale's even greater film called The Bride of Frankenstein that was made in 1935. There is the great James Whale, one of the great directors of the mid-20th century, and he will make Frankenstein, The Bride of Frankenstein, and The Invisible Man, becoming one of the great Universal directors. So here are a few re-release posters for the film. There's only one known copy of the original poster from this movie. You'll see that in at the end of this presentation, and I'll explain why it's so rare, so valuable, and so unique. The film's name was derived from the mad, obsessed scientist, Dr. Henry Frankenstein, played by Colin Clive, who experimentally creates an artificial life, an unnamed monster, played by the great Boris Karloff, that ultimately terrorizes the Bavarian countryside after being mistreated by his maker's assistant, Fritz, and society as a whole. The film's most famous scene, as you guys saw, is the one in which Frankenstein befriends a young girl named Maria at the lake's edge and mistakenly throws her into the water and drowns her along with other flowers. I think this is really truly one of the key scenes in the film. Now, later cuts of Frankenstein are going to have this scene removed. And it's just really tragic because this is the only time in the film where we actually see the monster have a little humanity. Sort of reminds me of the Tom Powers character in The Public Enemy, played by James Cagney. There are hints of humanity, especially in the bedside scene that we see where Cagney is recovering from his gunshot wounds, and he apologizes to his mom and family. And we gather that there's a good man trying to get out. Well, Frankenstein's monster is like he's a baby. And he is, a baby that's born into this 7-foot tall frame, or whatever it is. And he escapes from the castle and happens upon this little girl. And he holds her hand. And it's a tender moment where she doesn't care that he looks so terrible. She takes him by the hand and plays flowers with him. And he picks her up when he runs out of flowers and throws her in because he thought she was pretty like a flower too, and accidentally drowned her. And, this was seen by the censors. And we talk about the production code really soon. This was seen by censors to be just too extreme. And so they cut it out. And without this scene in the film, I would argue that the Frankenstein monster is just a mindless killer, an emotionless killer, much like Dracula. So I think Dracula and Frankenstein are very different in that regard. At least Frankenstein seems to have some emotions here. He didn't mean to kill her. Originally, the famed Dracula actor Bela Lugosi was cast as the monster, and French director Robert Fleury assigned to direct. But after various screen tests, Lugosi refused the part, and Universal chose British James Whale to direct. Significantly, this film then launched the career of unknown actor Boris Karloff, who was surprisingly uncredited in the opening credits of the film as the monster. In the beginning credits titled The Players, the monster is listed fourth with a question mark after its name. In the end credits, however, where the cast list is prefaced by "A good cast is worth repeating," the monster is listed fourth with Boris Karloff's name following. Karloff's performance is remarkable, his acting communicating a hint of the pitiful humanity of the grotesque monster behind its hideous, stitched, bolted-together body. You know, there are just so many wonderful things about this movie. And again, Lugosi turned the role down because he thought he would be ugly in all that makeup and had no lines. So he felt like that would hurt his chances for continuing to look handsome and being remembered as a handsome actor. So he turned the role down. What a mistake he made. He and Karloff would have a very contentious relationship. Very, very, very standoffish of one another. This is the film poster that I was telling you about, and it's goes back and forth really between Metropolis and this poster as to which is the most valuable. There's only one known of the Metropolis poster with the robot, and there's only one known of this one. Now look at this. Universal Studios publicity department had no idea where Universal was going to go with this movie. So all they knew was that Bela Lugosi was going to probably play Frankenstein's monster. So look at this. They have Frankenstein's monster as almost an Incredible Hulk-type figure, and it looks like Bela Lugosi with beams shooting out of his eyes, terrorizing a city. So, you know, this is very, very valuable. And, you know, the fact that Lugosi didn't end up playing the monster, to the fact that this film looks nothing like it does in this movie, makes this the most valuable film poster in the world. There's Boris Karloff, and if you have ever watched the original Grinch Who Stole Christmas, the narrator of the Grinch Who Stole Christmas is that man right there. And love his heart. He looked pretty intimidating as it was before they put all the makeup on him. But if you've ever watched The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, the voice who narrates the Grinch is that guy, Boris Karloff. As in its German predecessors, expressionist stylization in Frankenstein extends to acting, performance, and costume, most importantly in the design of the monster. Now, before I go any further here, there is so much expressionism all over Frankenstein. Everything from the creepy looking castle to the staircase that winds up and around to the cell where they're holding the monster as he screams, as he's chained to the wall. So much about this movie is expressionistic, including the weird looking beginning with the floating eyeballs. Aided by Jack Pierce's makeup and Whale's supportive direction, Karloff found a range of moods and a subtlety of movement in his performance that has never been equaled. A heavy door opens, and the creature backs slowly into the room, then turns around full figure. We briefly record a tall yet slightly stooped figure, its height and bulk accentuated by thick-soled boots. Those boots were weighted, by the way, to make Karloff struggle to walk in them. Whale then cuts to 3 successive closer views of the creature's distorted face. Now there's Karloff getting into makeup. It took him several hours to get into that each morning. And apparently all the people that were sitting around Karloff got physically sick because the makeup was meant to look green like a decomposed body or a dead body that was starting to turn and, you know, stitched and bolted together. So the people that were around Karloff said it was sickening to look at him because he looked so frightening. And just like Bela Lugosi was Dracula, guys, that is Frankenstein, at least to me. It's hard to beat Karloff's Frankenstein, and I don't think anybody will be able to do it. And like Lugosi, Karloff will be typecast as the Frankenstein monster. He becomes the monster for Universal. The expressionist style used in the horror classic can be seen in frame enlargements, in which James Whale cuts to 3 successive frame enlargements to introduce us in the expressionist style to Frankenstein. There's a moment in this movie that I really didn't understand until I had my son. The scene where Colin Clive, Dr. Frankenstein, tells the monster, sit down, and he sits down in the chair, and he's showing Dr. Waldman the light. He opens the roof, and the light comes in, and we see the monster slowly look up to the ceiling as the light is coming in, then stand up slowly and reach toward the light. I never knew what that meant until I had my son. And my wife and I were trying to take pictures of our baby that we had just brought home, or at least a couple days. He had been home a couple days. And we were trying to figure out a way to get him to look at our camera. And I got frustrated. I understood, he's a newborn baby, but I really wanted some pictures of him. And I remember turning our light on in the kitchen and seeing Lincoln, my son's eyes, slowly look up toward the light and try to raise his little head up toward the light. And I finally figured it out. Frankenstein's a baby. He's like fascinated by the light. And I never really understood that until I had my son. Look at that. My goodness. Yep, that is Frankenstein, folks. Mercy sakes alive, he's perfect. And did such a good job as that role as the monster. Frankenstein, after a while, he would be in 5 movies for Universal playing the monster. Got tired of how they abandoned the storytelling. He didn't like the fact that they had turned him into just a cold-blooded killer by the 5th movie he was in, and turned the role down, said they had destroyed the character. He wanted to play the role with a little humanity, and Universal was determined just to have him become a cold-blooded killer. Unlike German expressionist films like Nosferatu, Frankenstein doesn't employ visual distortion in every scene. Rather, the film alternates the episodes of horror shot in the expressionist style with others staged and photographed in an altogether different fashion. When we leave the world of the nighttime world of crypts and crooked towers, the realm where Frankenstein defies the laws of God and man to create an artificial being, we depart to what the film conceives as the normal world. So we alternate between scenes of horror and tranquility. For example, right after the monster kills Dr. Waldman, we go to the scene where Henry Frankenstein is having lunch with his fiancée. Incidentally, Mae Clarke, who plays Elizabeth in Frankenstein, you have already seen in The Public Enemy as one of the girls that Cagney and his friend Matt meet at the nightclub. In fact, she is the one who gets the grapefruit in the face. That's Mae Clarke, and she played Elizabeth in this movie. Near the end of the film, a burning windmill surrounded by a cheering posse is the scene's final image. The Promethean flames, a symbol of humanity usurping the power of the gods, have been seized by society, rising to protect itself from the freakish product of human ambition gone wild. Frankenstein was not without controversy, and you probably could have told me a few scenes that would have been controversial, ultimately leading to helping contribute to the institutionalization of the production code later. Its controversial content, in particular scenes depicting violence and dialogue, which was deemed to be blasphemous. For example, when Henry Frankenstein yells out, "Now I know what it's like to be God," that was very controversial. It's still 1931, folks. And it helped to make sure that Frankenstein would run into trouble with censorship boards all over the world. Although on first release, the U.S. federal censor didn't demand any cuts, several U.S. states only showed edited versions of Frankenstein. In Kansas City, the state board of censors demanded 32 cuts, and in Rhode Island, newspapers refused to run any advertisements for the movie at all. In Britain, censors cut out the scene where Frankenstein discovers Fritz's hanged body, a scene of the monster threatening Elizabeth, and the murder of Dr. Waldman. Speaking of Fritz, the hunchback character in this film was the great Dwight Frye. You saw him as Renfield in Dracula, who was the real estate agent. Dwight Frye would be a character actor and play supporting roles in a multitude of horror films for Universal. I think he did a great job, and believe that neither of these films, Dracula nor Frankenstein, would have been as good without him. And he plays just this kind of creepy little guy, and probably gets what's coming to him after tormenting Frankenstein's monster in this movie. There's actually a Norwegian death metal band called Dwight Frye in honor of this actor, who I don't think is given enough credit, because the Universal horror movies would not be nearly as good without him. When Frankenstein was re-released in the United States in 1937, Universal was forced to cut out several scenes as a result of the draconian production code that began to be enforced midway through 1934 that we're going to be talking about reasonably soon. Including, you got it, where the monster accidentally kills the little girl Maria, one of the key scenes of the film, if not the key scene of the film. Movie fans had to wait until 1985 to see a fully restored version of the movie, including all previously trimmed scenes. All current versions that have been released to DVD and VHS contain this uncut version, although some TV broadcasts may still be based on older censored prints. The film actually ended up getting banned in Kansas for its portrayal of, quote, cruelty that tended to debase morals, unquote. During the early stages of the pre-production on the biopic Walk the Line, director James Mangold interviewed the biopic subject, Johnny Cash. Cash told Mangold that his favorite film was Frankenstein, explaining that the idea of a gentle figure being mistaken for a monster spoke to him at a personal level. The world's most valuable movie poster I mentioned is the 1931 color Frankenstein 6-sheet, which is currently owned by a collector in New York, the only known copy to exist.
Thanks for joining us on Turner Classic Movies. This month, we're bringing you double and triple features starring the most famous monster of them all, Frankenstein's monster. And naturally, we start with the movie that introduced the character to audiences.
Universal Pictures in 1931.
It's Frankenstein.
Boris Karloff plays the monster, delivering the performance that defined the role. It was also the role that made Karloff a star, even though the original credits did not list his name, only a question mark. Universal's plan was to build the mystery of Frankenstein's monster. The story of Frankenstein dates back to an 1818 novel by Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley. Shelley was traveling through Europe with a group of writers, including two prominent English romantic poets, as Lord Byron, and also Shelley's future husband, Percy Shelley. They'd stay up late at night discussing writing and storytelling. Eventually, Byron suggested they all try their hand at a ghost story. Mary Shelley thought for a few days, then came up with a story about a well-meaning scientist who experiments with reanimating a corpse, but is horrified when he succeeds, and his results go badly wrong. Her literary friends were impressed with her work. Soon after, her short story, The Encouragement of Percy Shelley, was turned into a novel. There were several early attempts to adapt Shelley's story into a film, beginning with a version by Thomas Edison in 1910. But the movie version we're about to see broke through, setting the template for a decade of horror movies, giving Universal the genre to dominate. 1931, directed by James Whale, Colin Clive as the Doctor, and Boris Karloff as his monster. Here's Frank.